Do you ever just assume that justice and mercy sit comfortably together? In Numbers chapter 35, we're going to unpack how someone's life and a momentary mistake can collide, and without structures for both protection and accountability, innocent people can get crushed and communities can lose moral credibility. Today we're going to unpack cities of refuge and accidental manslaughter versus murder, which is talked about in the Bible, and how laws protect justice and mercy. And I'll give you one immediate action that you can use to strengthen fair process in your community. In this episode of Biblical Unlocks, this show is designed to help build your habit of reading the Bible, understanding the Bible, and applying it in your daily life. If you enjoy episodes like this, please consider following and rating the show. It's free, it helps me out a lot, and you can always change your mind later. Now let's get a little bit of context into this chapter. So Numbers chapter 35 establishes the cities of refuge and rules distinguishing manslaughter from murder. It prescribes procedures for trial and asylum and assigns Levite cities and border towns. After conquest and settlement planning, the text actually turns to a sort of legal infrastructure where life must be protected even when tragedy occurs, and the community must guard against revenge whilst preserving justice. Okay, so let's read the first 15 verses. This is going to be focused on the city's refuge, which will be established. And my question to you is, why does God provide sanctuary for an accidental killer? Doesn't that encourage lawlessness? Verse 1, In the plains of Moab by the Jordan opposite Jericho, the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Command the Israelites to give from the inheritance that they possess towns for the Levites to live in. You shall also give to the Levites pasture lands surrounding the towns. The towns shall be theirs to live in, and their pasture land shall be for their cattle, for their livestock, and for all their animals. The pasture lands of the towns which you shall give to the Levites shall reach from the wall of the town outward 1,000 cubits all around. You shall measure outside the town for the east side 2,000 cubits, for the south side 2,000 cubits, for the west side 2,000 cubits, and for the north side 2,000 cubits, with the town in the middle. This shall belong to them as a pasture land for their towns. The towns that you give to the Levites shall include the 6 cities of refuge, where you shall permit a slayer to flee, and in addition to them you shall give 42 towns. The towns that you give to the Levites shall total 48, with their pasture lands. And as for the towns that you shall give from the possession of the Israelites, from the larger tribes you shall take many, and from the smaller tribes you shall take few, each in proportion to the inheritance that it obtains, shall give of its towns to the Levites. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to the Israelites and say to them, When you cross the Jordan into the land of Canaan, then you shall select cities to be cities of refuge for you, so that a slayer who kills a person without intent may flee there. The cities shall be for you a refuge from the avenger, so that the slayer may not die until there is a trial before the congregation. The cities that you designate shall be 6 cities of refuge for you. You shall designate 3 cities beyond the Jordan, and 3 cities in the land of Canaan to be cities of refuge. These 6 cities shall serve as refuge for the Israelites, for the resident or transient alien among them, so that anyone who kills a person without intent may flee there. So, biblical unlock number 1. Why does the Bible, why does Israel have places, safe spaces, where someone who has killed another person gets a sanctuary, right? Doesn't a sanctuary just let people escape justice? The cities of refuge here are actually a protective countermeasure to private vengeance. Ancient blood feuds could turn a single accident into a multi-generational violence, and this refuge here actually interrupts that spiral towards animosity. These cities allow time for a disinterested legal process to actually determine a person's culpability, and this shows that the law has 2 commitments. One is to protect life, including the accused person's right to a fair hearing, and to hold communal order by preventing revenge killings that could destroy families and towns. Okay, let's read verses 16 to 25. We are actually going to see one of the earliest examples of distinguishing manslaughter from premeditated murder. How does this law distinguish intent, and why does intent matter morally and legally? Okay, verse 16. But anyone who strikes another with an iron object and death ensues is a murderer. The murderer shall be put to death. Or anyone who strikes another with a stone in hand that could cause death, and death ensues, is a murderer. The murderer shall be put to death. Or anyone who strikes another with a weapon of wood in hand that could cause death, and death ensues, is a murderer. The murderer shall be put to death. The avenger of blood is the one who shall put the murderer to death. When they meet, the avenger of blood shall execute the sentence. Verse 20. Likewise, if someone pushes another from hatred or hurls something at another, lying in wait, and death ensues, or in enmity strikes another with the hand and death ensues, then the one who struck the blow shall be put to death. That person is a murderer. The avenger of blood shall put the murderer to death when they meet. But if someone pushes another suddenly without enmity, or hurls any object without lying in wait, or while handling any stone that could cause death, unintentionally drops it on another and death ensues, though they were not enemy and no harm was intended, then the congregation shall judge between the slayer and the avenger of blood in accordance with these ordinances, and the congregation shall rescue the slayer from the avenger of blood. Then the congregation shall send the slayer back to the original city of refuge. The slayer shall live in it until the death of the high priest who is anointed with the holy oil. Biblical unlock number 2. How can a society tell the difference between an accident and a planned killing, and why is that distinction morally important? Intent is the pivot of culpability. Premeditated murder attacks the social order with malice and must be punished severely. Accidental killing, though it is tragic, lacks the moral volition that makes murder culpable. The law therefore needs to institute inquiry, witness examination, location, context, and the accused person's flight or lack thereof to discern motive. Morally, the distinction between premeditated murder and actually manslaughter is something that protects the proportionality in the justice system. Punishments must fit the moral quality of the act and not merely the outcome that is resulted. Because if a person accidentally commits a murder versus if they intentionally commit a murder, the moral intent behind either action is different and therefore must be differently adjudicated. Okay, let's read verses 26 to 34. The focus here is going to be the procedure for fleeing into a city and the role of the congregation. Verse 26. But if the slayer shall at any time go outside the bounds of the original city of refuge, and is found by the avenger of blood outside the bounds of the city of refuge, and is killed by the avenger, no blood guilt shall be incurred, for the slayer must remain in the city of refuge until the death of the high priest. But after the death of the high priest, the slayer may return to his prophecy. These things shall be a statute and ordinance for you throughout your generations wherever you live. If anyone kills another, the murderer shall be put to death on the evidence of the witness, but no one shall be put to death on the testimony of a single witness. Moreover, you shall accept no ransom for the life of a murderer who is subject to the death penalty. A murderer must be put to death, nor shall you accept ransom for one who has fled to a city of refuge, enabling the fugitive to return to live in the land before the death of the high priest. You shall not pollute the land in which you live, for blood pollutes the land, and no expiation can be made for the land for the blood that is shed in it, except by the blood of the one who shed it. You shall not defile the land in which you live, in which I also dwell, for I, the Lord, dwell among the Israelites. Alright, so, final biblical unlock. Why won't people just flee to claim refuge even when guilty? How does the system actually avoid being manipulated? So, this is the idea here in this objection, is that people can just leave, right? They can go whenever they want to these cities of refuge and there's no accountability here. However, the covenant system actually balances access with accountability. The accused person must reach a designated city quickly and remain under asylum until a trial by the congregation or elders actually clarifies the guilt. If the murderer is found guilty of murder, the refuge no longer protects. If innocent of malice, the individual is returned to life and eventually released. These procedural safeguards, having a public trial, community witnesses, and not just one witness but multiple witnesses, and the Levites' oversight, reduce false refuge claims and ensure that justice is always upheld. In principle, however, in practice, this may not always be the case. Okay, so I also wanted to point out something important as well, because obviously in this chapter we see a little bit of Christological significance. I'll go in a little bit more detail in the actual section, but as you can see, in verse 33 we read, "You shall not pollute the land in which you live, for blood pollutes the land, and no expiation can be made for the land for the blood that is shed in it, except by the blood of the one who shed it." Now, the reason why I'm drawing your attention to this particular verse is because it has a lot of significance, and people will often say, well, this verse suggests that you cannot pay for other people's sins. The only person who can pay for their own sins is the one who commits or sheds the blood. But as we see in the Christological significance, Jesus Christ pays for everyone's sins. So Christ is going to be the ultimate fulfillment of this, in that we cannot pay for our own sins. We have to pay for our own sins in the Old Testament law, right? No one can pay for other people's sin when it comes to death penalty, or the death penalty, or the capital punishment. Instead, you have to be accountable for your own sin. And this level of accountability is what's going to actually set up Jesus Christ, because if we are accountable for our own sins and we cannot get out of this body of sin, hell, and death, we need someone else who can take our place for us. So Numbers chapter 35 actually shows us an asylum system, which reveals God's concern for both justice and mercy. He protects life from the poison of vengeance while ensuring the guilty are rightly judged. In Christ, these aims converge supremely. He takes the consequence of human violence, offers refuge to sinners, and inaugurates a community where grace curbs private retribution. The gospel reshapes our legal imagination. Mercy does not dissolve accountability, rather it underwrites a system that seeks restoration without swallowing justice. As we read in Matthew chapter 5 verse 7, "Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy." What this line tells us, what this verse from Christ tells us in his Sermon on the Mount, is that we should be guided in how we design processes that protect life and invite repentance and restoration. Alright, so some practical applications. How can we apply what we learned in Numbers chapter 35 in our everyday life? I think the most important thing is the justice and mercy aspect of our lives. We can identify one area in our community, in our life, where informal retaliation or gossip is actually replacing formal conflict resolution. It's important that we have a single, transparent step that allows for mediation and public hearing, or having just simply a restorative circle, because we don't want to replace rumor with process. We don't want to throw out false accusations, but rather give everything and every person the rightful hearing that they deserve. And the second thing is, we talked about refuge, right? How individuals who are accused of crimes actually, or accused of doing something, should actually be protected. That is what God intends. And it's important to recognize as well that the moral character, the intentionality behind particular actions are related to the consequences that they have to incur as a result. So having this protocol, having something to hear people out impartially is really important. Well, that's it for this episode of Biblical Unlocks. In Numbers chapter 35, we learned about the cities of refuge, how they are a form of preventative mercy, how they stop blood feuds and create space for impartial justice. This law has a careful distinction between intent and outcome and protects proportionality. Punishment must account for moral volition, not just consequence. And we see procedural safeguards here. Flight, asylum, public trial, Levite oversight, which balance access to refuge with protection against its abuse. Practically, what this chapter calls us is to protect communities and design processes that, again, safeguard the vulnerable, prevent private revenge, and ensure that there is fair and public adjudication over such matters. So in the next episode, we're going to move from cities for the accused to practical living and inheritance clarifications in Numbers chapter 36. We'll ask how preserving tribal land and family lines shape justice and continuity for a pilgrim people. You don't want to miss it. The final chapter of Numbers. Anyway, if you enjoy episodes like this, please consider following and rating the show. It's free, it helps me out a lot, and you can always change your mind later. Otherwise, just have a blessed day. And remember, if you're not in your word, you're in your feelings. Godspeed.